afternoon. Am I turned on here? I think that I am. You all have been incredibly patient, sitting through what I found to be both inspiring and informative presentations, but it is a lot of sitting. So I'm going to give you just 10 seconds to stand up and stretch before we begin. If you would like to do that, stand up, wiggle your arms, don't leave the room. There's going to be food later. There's no food out there now. Okay, sit down. I'm Lawrence MacDonald from the Center for Global Development, and I've set a very high bar for our panel today. I think the Washington development community is unique, certainly unusual in the world in the high level of knowledge and involvement. We have people here from all over the world, people intimately involved in both service and program delivery and in policy. And so I want our discussion today to be at least as informative and at least as entertaining as what we saw from New York. So that's a high bar indeed. And to do that, I have asked our panelists to respond initially with a verbal tweet. I think some of you know, you've been watching the Twitter fall, that a tweet is 140 characters. We're not going to count their characters, but I told them roughly 14 words. I'll introduce the panelists. To my left, Carol Lancaster. Carol is the Dean of the School of Foreign Service at Georgetown University. I'm proud to say she's also a non-resident fellow at the Center for Global Development, where I work, and a former deputy head of USAID. She's also held senior positions in the State Department, matches that standard of scholar and practitioner. To Carol's left is Geeta Rao Gupta. Geeta is currently a fellow at the Gates Foundation, and I understand had a little bit to do with what we saw from New York, and probably give us some insights to that. Geeta is also the former head of the International Center for Research on Women and one of the world's leading experts on the role of girls and women in development and the ways in which policy affect their lives and in turn how their lives shape development outcomes. And last but certainly not least, Steve Moseley. You have met as the president of AED. Steve has been in the development business for 30 years and has been the CEO of AED for 20 years. Steve, thank you for hosting us. It's a wonderful facility, and your staff has been absolutely terrific.
Thank you.
Carol, I want to start with you. 14 words, more or less, either on the goals themselves or on what we heard from New York. And I'm going to let you come back and explain it a little bit later. But what's your takeaway?
Well, Lawrence, thanks very much. Thanks for everybody being here. Is this working? This is a little, is there too much feedback on
They're going
this?
to fix it for you. You just proceed.
I'm glad you didn't ask me to do a haiku, because I haven't
Haiku would be okay. You could do
I haven't tweeted before either, so I guess you're pushing me into the 21st century. I found the presentation inspiring. It said something very important. Yes, we've made a lot of progress, and I'm sorry, this is more than 14 words.
It's a bad example, Carol, but that's okay. I'll get you back.
You're really threatening. I've seen the real progress out there because I've followed development issues in Latin America and Africa for many decades. But there's a lot to do. And after we're done, there's still going to be a lot to do. But I think with this inspiration and the information that we've heard, we can just do it.
Just do it. So it's not Coca-Cola, it's Nike, huh?
I don't like Coca-Cola.
Geeta.
So I kept to my 14 words. You know, I was educated in a convent school in India, so the nuns didn't number on me. When I'm given a task, I keep to the task. So my 14 words: celebrate progress, then prioritize investments in girls and women to complete the task.
Bravo. Steve, you have a hard act to follow.
I do have a hard act to follow. I tried tweeting all weekend, and actually I've learned to be less verbose and say lots of things in 14 words or less. Actually, I revised this as I was listening because I thought the presentation was spectacular. I say the MDGs can be accomplished by partnering with and engaging directly the people most in need.
Thanks very much. So what the New York Times says, UN poverty goals face accountability questions. How many of you saw this on Sunday, online or in the paper? It quotes the people you would expect to be quoted. Jeffrey Sachs saying what we need is more money. Esther Duflo saying we really have no idea what works. And so I want to pose the question to our panel. a lot of the perception of what is going on in New York with the MDG Summit is going to be about saying, let's all join hands, let's work together, and let's have more money. Is money the solution or the problem? Who'd like to go first?
I think it's not just more money, it's money spent effectively. I think where we are losing the return on the investments we make is we're not making them as efficiently as we can. We're not targeting the resources to the issues and the strategies that would give us the best return. So I think, yeah, of course, we always need more money, but I think we have to give a lot more thought to how we can serve those most in need, the ones who are underserved, the places where we can get a return on the investment, and do that in a way that's effective, and learn from those lessons to replicate and scale up elsewhere. That's what I would say.
Steve, AED is in the business of using money, I presume, using it well, but certainly if there were less money, there'd be fewer people at AED. So I'm wondering what your thought is on the money effectiveness.
Well, we don't measure ourselves by the number of people at AED. We measure ourselves by the number of people and the people who are being served effectively. That's the critical thing. That was the message that was here today. Engaging locally with the people that you're trying to serve and making sure that the money, when there's enough money, is driven down to the programs locally and focusing. I think the main message that kept coming through is target your resources, target the money. Money's important, but target it in a way that reaches people and reaches particularly the people that most need it. One of the challenges I think we've had over the last decade is a lot of people start with the generalities, start at the top, and assume somehow still, even though we forgave ourselves years ago to get away from trickle down. In many ways, governments tend to start on the whole basis. And what we always need to do if we're going to address poverty, we're going to address the needs that are specified in the MGA, is to start targeting those most in need. It's often the last mile, the last 20 to 30%, those who must be reached by targeting our resources. But I do agree that money is important. Without money, not for the NGOs to spend, but money to be spent on the ground to ensure that the follow-through is there, that the programs can actually be implemented, that people on the ground can be paid, as the gentleman from Thailand showed. They're engaged, they're mobilized, so that there's social mobilization going on in concert with the money, in concert with local people.
Carol?
Well, I think obviously money is important. There are a lot of things that people can't do when they're very, very poor, or countries can't do when they're very, very poor, that need to be done. We need to help people put the foundations in place to help them better themselves. But I think one of the things that came out in the conversation on the screen was that we need something beyond that. We need economies that will grow, because without growth, we're going to be constantly paying money for things that won't be sustainable by themselves. That, I think, is a piece of the puzzle that has been downplayed a little bit in the MDGs, and I hope it's something that people will keep in their minds. There's another piece, too, and that is that, yes, we need the data. We need to see the data. We need to judge on the basis of the data. But sometimes it takes a long time to see what we're doing. And there is a tendency in the development community, especially certain segments of it, that says, well, if we haven't done it in 18 months and we can't measure it in 18 months, then it hasn't been effective. I think a great deal of damage has been done to our understanding and our patience by that approach. So I would say, yeah, we've got a lot of good things. We've seen them this morning. It's not the whole story. It's a very important piece of the story. There's more.
You know, I'm glad you mentioned the data, because my favorite piece was Hans Rosling. Of course, I've seen his presentations online. This was certainly, for me, a new one, and obviously very powerful and very encouraging, the rapid rate of progress being made by some countries. Having looked a little bit, or actually having colleagues at the center who've looked at the data, it's not exactly the case that it's all there and readily accessible. I think it's true what Hans Rosling said. The data's in there. It's been very, very difficult to surface it. And one of my colleagues at the center, Ben Leo, has recently produced a set of country scorecards where he's actually made this data readily accessible. And one of the surprising things out of that is really how well countries have done. And I actually didn't expect that. So I think the data does tell a good story, but we've been very, very slow as a development community to make it available.
Well,
Geeta?
you know, data is the biggest problem with figuring out how best to invest in girls and women. We don't have data on women's lives like we should. So when you have rigorous targeting required through programs, and when policymakers say, tell us exactly where we can put our money, we say girls' education, we have data for that. But there are whole chunks of information about women's economic lives, we don't have sex disaggregated data at the household level on poverty, on income. There are large sectors of the labor market where you cannot say how many women versus men are working in that sector of the labor market for many countries around the world. So when we do analysis on girls and women, we are so handicapped by that, and we're often basing our conclusions on 50 countries or 40 countries that have the data, especially the trend analysis. To do that kind of analysis, you don't have the data for it.
Well, I learned recently that even the maternal mortality data is very uncertain. I would have thought this is something that wouldn't be that hard to count. But
That's right. In fact, this is a somewhat controversial remark to make, but I knew somebody who, listening to my diatribe about missing data on women's lives, said to me, why don't you start a campaign that says women's figures matter?
That sounds like Hans Rühling's approach.
Taking a page from Coke. I want to ask any one of you who want to respond, or maybe each of you, if we look beyond money. I mean, at my center, we're always saying, money's good, money delivered smartly is even better, but there's a lot more than money. And the 8th Development MDG is not only about money, it's about linkages, it's about partnership. And if you could choose one area of partnership for the rich world to do a better job at, what would your choice be? Setting aside the money question. Steve?
I think the last goal is really about linking across the goals. It's not just linking in terms of economic outcomes and the participation by the donor community and the partnerships with the private sector. All those things are very important. And I thought it came out very well in the discussion that Melinda Gates presented, because she was drawing the relationship between the growth, the reduction in child mortality tied into education and girls' education. She tied the growth and opportunity for, I think it was later, with small families. We know that if a family is going to be less than 7 or 9 children, it has to do with education up through the primary and secondary. She talked about those relationships. And I think one of the challenges we have is we haven't related the relationships of these goals very well together. We've stovepiped them. We're siloed in the various ministries. So I think that the real partnership is going to be how to take what we know has a leveraging capacity among them and use the scarce resources in a way with governments that leverage them. How to get the social sectors in governments to work together. That kind of partnership will bring our community with certain kinds of expertise in partnership with multiple ministries, and the outcome will be schooling making a difference on all of the quality of life indicators that go with the other goals, and vice versa. We'll have an achievement. Back on your data, one of the things we found is that while people say the Millennium Development Goal on number 2 on education isn't so important because we've got so many kids in school, but are they learning? That's where data comes in. What difference in the life is education making? What do they know that will then relate to these other things? So data, partnership, linkage, cross-linkage, leveraging among the different areas.
Carol? What could the rich world, if you could choose one sector for the rich world to do a better job in, aside from aid delivery, what would you choose?
Can I answer your previous question?
Yeah,
being
sure.
undisciplined as I am?
Absolutely.
Because I think it's the wrong question. You asked,
Which question are you answering?
what kind of, if I understood you correctly, what kind of organization would we partner with if we had a choice? Did I get that right?
I don't think I asked that question, but go ahead, answer it.
Well, I thought that's what you asked. In any case, I think it's the wrong question. Should you have asked it? I think one of the things that really came out of this presentation this morning, and one of the things that I think has really changed in the last 20 years of development, is that so many other groups, individuals, organizations are involved, both in the countries that are trying to improve the well-being of their peoples in the developing world, and also in countries like ours that are well off. It is something quite extraordinary, and it didn't exist 20 or 30 years ago when mainly the development discourse was governments, a few NGOs, the churches, and now we have a whole range of things. And I think it looks awfully chaotic, and sometimes we're stumbling over one another.